G'day, listeners. You are listening to the Natives Rouseabout podcast. I'm your host, Trent, and today the ANA Victoria Governor Thomas will be joining me. How are you going, Tom?
Yeah, going really good. I'm very excited about the podcast today.
Great. We'll also be joined by a special guest, Pete Quinones. Listeners may know Pete from his podcast, The Pete Quinones Show, where he produces an absolutely huge amount of really high quality content for our guys. Welcome to the show, Pete. How are you going today, mate?
Doing well. I guess we're 15 or 16 hours apart, but yeah, thank you for the invite. I was excited to do it.
Oh, well, thank you for responding and joining us today so eagerly. One of the main reasons that we reached out to you is because you are a member of an organization called the Old Glory Club, and I see the Old Glory Club and the ANA as being fellow traveller organisations. So today we'll be covering a few topics, some of the differences and similarities between the political and cultural situation in our respective countries, and some of the strategies and goals that our different organisations are adopting to deal with those situations. But before we get stuck into all that, we always start with a few listener comments from our last episode. So we had Hengist and Horsa88 said, what you guys think of other political commentators in Australia, like Thomas Sewell and Ozpil? I'll kick that over to you, Tom. You got any response for Horsa88?
Yeah. Great to hear from you. So it's hard to say, really, because members within ANA have a lot of really diverse views on different people and topics and whatnot. So it's a very wide question. It would be fair to say that most members in ANA are pro some of the ideas put forward by various people, such as the ones mentioned, without tying ourselves to everything that they say or do, whether that's people like Tom or Ozpil or Gerard Rennick or anyone else like that, anyone else in between. So,
yeah. All right. And we also had Dan. He commented and said, another great show, gents. Would love to hear a discussion on what led you to the ANA as opposed to other nationalistic groups of the past or present. Well,
yeah, we'd love to do it. We certainly can. But it's, definitely too big of a question to do in this episode. We've got too much other stuff to cover.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for the comments, fellas. And as always, if there's something that you want to hear us talk about on the show, let us know in the comments and you'll probably hear a future episode about it. All right. I'm expecting we'll probably have a few first-time listeners for this episode with our guests. So I'll do a really quick rundown on the ANA. We are an Australian patriotic fraternal organisation originally founded in 1871. The original iteration of the ANA was very heavily involved in the federation of the 6 separate British colonies into the one nation of Australia. And the ANA was revived in 2015 with the mission of advancing the interests of heritage Australians. And I believe that the Old Glory Club has a somewhat similar story and goals. So I'll kick it over to you, Pete. Why don't you tell us a bit about the OGC, what it is, why it exists, and why you're involved?
It is a fraternal organization. It's registered as such. We have independent chapters throughout the states, and they register and they make their own bylaws. So if they want to make it so that you can only trace your family, as you have to be able to trace your family to a certain time in coming to the States to be an officer in the chapter. They do that. They have complete autonomy. They just have to register the same way as a fraternity as the Central Committee has registered. We started in 2022. We've grown. We started with a central online organization and with the goal of having state chapters. In 3 years, we're in, I believe, it's we have 28 chapters in multiple states. I could pull it up now. I could count them, but it's over 20 states. More come online. It seems like we're voting every week on at least one or two new ones, and it just keeps going and going and going, growing exponentially. And the idea is that as multiculturalism and global homo grow in the Anglosphere, that you have those people who've been whose families have been here since before the founding of the country. I'm not one. I'm adopted. My my family, both sides of my family, have been here over 100 years. But we have people in the OGC who can trace back to 1620 to Plymouth and places and Jamestown, places like that. So basically, as we watch the war upon Anglo whites grow, white Europeans grow in what is known as the West, people need to come together who have similar values and similar heritage to do everything that they can to protect that. And that is what the Old Glory Club decided that they were going to do, is to have a fraternal organization that can lift people up, support people. The first thing we talked about was if someone gets canceled, being able to take care of them and make sure that their family gets taken care of, that they're not forgotten. And we've just grown from there. And if the Montana chapter wants to just concentrate on fishing and conservation, they can do that. If the chapter if a California chapter wants to, we're not political at all. We're not a political organization. But if the California chapter wants to organize in their community, start a mutual aid society or something like that, they're free to do that. So it is just, we noticed that there was a war happening, and that the main goal of many was to delegitimize and destroy the white European, and that people came together to say, what can we do to protect each other from that?
Yeah, the people coming together, something that I'll add to that is it's so important for this to be in real life and not just something that's online. You mentioned that the OGC started out online, but you've moved very quickly to in real life local stuff, and we've had a few new recruits at the ANA who are listeners of yourself or some of the other OGC voices that have cited you guys and your insistence on the importance of IRL organization and activity as being what prompted them to finally go like, oh yeah, I'm going to reach out and get involved with something at my local level. So that message is getting out there. It's interesting that you bring up the mutual aid societies too, because that's something that the ANA was very big on originally, like prior to the sort of health insurance and socialized medicine that we have. Mutual aid was a very big part of the community, and now we're living through a time where the health insurance system is no longer working. Our socialized medicine system is breaking down. So it's interesting that we're kind of reverting back, like we're relearning the communal lessons of our grandfathers and great grandfathers at this time.
Yeah, we're not quite as grim as the UK or Canada yet when it comes to the healthcare system breaking down, but
no.
We are on that same trajectory.
Well, actually, speaking of, I had this question sort of lined up. I wanted you guys to tell me if you thought that there was out of the Anglosphere or the English speaking countries, who do you think is in from a nationalist perspective in the worst spot? Who's got the most work to do? Who's gonna fall and be the example that spurs all of the rest of the Anglo countries into action? Do you guys have?
It's got to be Canada. I think it's got to be Canada, surely, because the UK is pretty horrible, pretty grim, that's for sure. But it's still their homeland, and there's still this strength that seems to lie in their hands. In some of their hands, they're having these riots, which are obviously, not particularly constructive and aren't particularly getting anywhere. But it does show that there's some, life left.
Mm. Did you have? Do you want to weigh in on that one, Pete?
Yeah, it seems like who has it the worst off is England at this point. I almost want to say Ireland because it's happened to them so fast.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's really the span of 10, 12 years now where they've been unloaded upon by every brown like bioweapon that could be sent into that country.
Yeah.
And good.
Oh, I was going to say it's interesting that out of all those people, the most sort of the people that you would expect to chimp out the most are probably the Irish. If you were like somebody's burnt down a migrant hotel, you're like, yeah, it's probably going to be the Irish out of anybody. And they're also the ones where the frog has not been boiled that slowly. They've really hit them very hard in a very short amount of time. So that's probably why we're seeing such volatile scenes coming out of there.
I'm surprised we don't see more volatile scenes out of Australia, considering how many immigrants we're getting here at the moment.
Well, the Irish, they haven't undergone the social engineering that the English have. I mean, you're talking about basically there's been a social engineering regime working on the English since World War II. Mm. And, one thing that I've heard from somebody I know who lives in Britain, and I've heard Carl Benjamin say this, is that the British hate themselves. They've been taught to hate themselves, to loathe who they are and what they are.
Yeah.
And the Irish aren't there. The Irish are still Irish. And, knowing the history of this country and the Scotch Irish, and, I'm married to a descendant of the Scotch Irish settlers. They're ready to chimp. I mean, it's a powder keg in Ireland right now. And, you hope, you pray, and maybe you try to make some plans to help them out in any way you can. Elon Musk could send boats to the shores that might have things on them that could help them with their little problem. But he could do that for the English too. But I think it's going to take a lot more. Some of my English friends are still talking about, our parliament is completely sovereign. If we just get the right people elected, and when anybody says all we need to do is get the right people elected, it's like, oh, yeah, we've been saying that here. We've been saying that here for a long time. But a friend of mine who has been doing a lot of traveling lately, he thinks, his opinion is that actually the first place you're going to see go up in this would be ironic because I've been saying that we're going to have a spirit of 1848 on the right. and where it's something's going to blow up in one place and it'll just spread everywhere else. He said he thinks it's going to start in France first. Yeah. He said he's already seen that, in Paris, the French they resent, they have a burning hot resentment of what's been done to their country and the migrants and these weapons that have been, these human weapons that have been sent in to destroy, what France is. So he said he thinks it's going to start in France, and I thought, well, that's ironic considering I've been talking about 1848 for so long.
Yeah, he could be right. Like again, they're another group of people that are ready to chimp, which in the situation that we're in, it's absolutely necessary.
It doesn't take much to get the French to chimp out, which is been a bit of a running joke. But you're right, they're hot-blooded people.
Well, what he said was they're going to chimp when the benefits run out. He said that will be the trigger for the French, because that's what they want. They want their free stuff. Yeah, they want their government benefits. And if the government benefits dry up or get delayed, you will see a huge. He believes that everything with the migrant attacks and just how Paris isn't Paris anymore, that it's just a matter of time there.
It is a trite to say this, I suppose, but it is bred in circuses. It's a much more refined version of it. We have all of these welfare systems. We've got healthcare. We've got food stamps and other assistance. We've got all of that, and then we have this massive entertainment system. Everyone's got this massive access to entertainment in their in their pockets. They have it on their TVs at home. You can be constantly entertained by slop all your life if that's what you want. So if either of those things break down, it's more likely it'll be the benefits, because entertainment is, there's just practically an infinite amount of it now. We're going to see some very interesting times.
Yeah. It's, people ask, what will it take here and that's just the one thing that we have here that other places don't have is, we're gigantic. We have 50 states, and we have federalism, and, we have nullification. And that was something that we saw all the way through COVID, where, depending on what state you lived in, you had freedom to move about. And if you lived in the wrong state, you were locked in your house, essentially. I just happened to live in Georgia at the time, and when some counties would lock down, but the state was never locked down. Florida was, people forget that Ron DeSantis actually did lock the state down for, I think, 10 days, and he was going to do it longer, but then he came to his senses, and I think he did some real research to find out that this thing wasn't dangerous and wasn't as dangerous as it was being described as, and he reopened. So, if you lived in, North Dakota, if you lived in Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, you knew there was something happening, and it affected you financially in different ways. But if you lived in California, there were people who didn't leave their house for, basically barely left their house for a year, 2 years. And that's the one thing we still have here is, if you're in a state, the state of Alabama we're a big state. We have 5 million people, but we are having, and I'm not saying this is the greatest thing in the world, because the Republican Party is our enemy just as much as the Democrat Party is, even more so, because they should know better and they should be on our side, and they will jump to cancel you quicker than the Democrat will. If you go too far, if you're just a little bit right of them, they'll look to punch right on you. But we have a super majority every election for a Republican. I mean, the Democrat running for governor there's no point in it. When we have the presidential election, they usually call Alabama for the Republican before voting even starts. So I guess the one good thing we do have here is this federalism and this nullification, and a governor can choose to completely ignore orders from Washington, D.C.
We've seen a few crises like that play out the last few years, like one in California and one in Texas when Biden was still in. So it is interesting to see that, because we don't have displays like that happen pretty much ever in Australia. I can't think of one. I'm sure there's been some hectic moments, maybe with maybe up in Queensland. That's the sort of thing that Queensland normally does.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. You're talking about the federalism and the law structure, and like that's definitely something that's nationalists in the US have going for them. But I was just thinking of COVID when COVID was happening. I know Thomas is down in Victoria. That was, if you saw like stories on the news about like horrific lockdowns and riot police tear gassing and belting anti-lockdown protesters, that was pretty much all centered around Victoria. Coincidentally, the most multicultural state, and Melbourne the most multicultural city. But up in Queensland, it was a lot less intense, all of the lockdowns and the laws. And I still lost my job for refusing to be vaccinated. And I travelled up to Cairns, which is in far north Queensland, and got off the plane. And it was like where, COVID no longer existed, because the people up there just were not worried about it. So it's amazing how much, the government can be doing one thing, but if the people on the ground are doing a different thing, it just felt totally different. Whereas when I was in Brisbane, there was people wearing masks, people following these ridiculous lockdown rules and wearing masks when they're driving in cars by themselves. And as I said, stepping off the plane and out of the airport into Cairns, and just COVID no longer existed, just because the people there were not worrying about it. One thing I want to talk some more about is, you mentioned the Republicans are the enemy. So for us, the party that would be analogous with the Republicans would be the LNP, and they are definitely, in my opinion, they're our enemy. They need to be stopped. They need to be stomped out. They're just choking out any progress in any nationalist direction. That sounded like you wanted to chime in with something there, Tom.
Oh, completely agree. Couldn't agree more. They're absolutely the enemy. They're sensible solutions of reducing immigration from 500,000 to 200,000 or 300,000 from the most based politician that they have is obviously not nearly enough, but is also not ever going to happen anyway. They always talk tough on immigration and never end up enforcing it. And they talk about stopping the boats and whatnot. And fantastic, you stop a few boats, stop a few hundred people coming in, and yet hundreds of thousands come pouring in. So
yeah,
solution.
Pete's probably laughing at some of those numbers, but when you're in a country of 25 or 26 million,
multiply everything by 12 or 13 times.
Yeah.
Oh no, I mean I've watched what happened in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to laugh at those numbers. I know. What's funny is if you go back and you listen to Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech in the 1960s, his concern was 5,000 a year.
Wow, was it? There you go. Oh,
Yeah, you can get that. There were, I would probably assume, I've never really looked deep into this, but when you consider the numbers that came over when Joe Biden was president, I'm assuming 5,000 here was probably a couple days.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, Republicans here, I don't know how much you pay attention to what happened here, but when Charlie Kirk got shot, and Charlie Kirk wasn't our guy. I mean, he was never our guy, but what our guys realized when he got shot was, well, if they think he's a fascist, what do they think of us?
Yeah.
What do they, depending on who you believe did this, I'll go with the official narrative. But the thing is that after Charlie was shot, the administration, Trump's administration, his White House, had a chance. They had their mandate to just absolutely go hog wild and crack down on not only street protesters, not only on the people who commit violence in the streets here, but their networks, the politicians who supported them. I mean, remember, the former vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, told people in 2020 to go out in the streets and burn stuff, and said, we will bail you out. And this is when she was I believe she was a senator. So there was a chance to do this, but no, that didn't happen. What happened? Well, because nobody will do this, people like Nick Fuentes get a lot of press, and people start wondering, okay, well, why does this guy, whenever he goes on podcasts, those podcasts have the biggest audience they've ever had? That includes Tucker Carlson, that includes Dave Smith, that includes pretty much everybody, Patrick Bet-David. Why does he have this following? And Tucker decided to ask that question and have him on. And there's no better window into exactly what the GOP and what Republicans are here than when Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, which is one of the oldest think tanks, one of these old think tanks here, came out and defended Tucker and said, we'll always support Tucker. And the Jewish lobby here just absolutely came down upon him. Yoram Hazony, who's an Israeli, flew from Israel to come help him to understand that, this. And you basically, what you're seeing now is you have Republicans who they've forgotten who the enemy is. And that's always been the problem with conservatives / Republicans in this country is they want the left to accept them. They want the acceptance of people on the left. And I'm using right and left. I mean, these aren't real left wingers. They're not real left wingers. They're not real right. They're not real right wingers. But just for lack of a better term, they want Republicans here. There's this old thing where we used to say, when I was a libertarian, we used to say, the problem is that Republicans and the Republicans and the GOP just think that the left is misguided. They mean well, but they're misguided. But if anyone who's to the right of them is just evil, they have evil intentions in everything they do. So you have somebody like Jonah Goldberg, another Jew, who writes a book called Liberal Fascism. So that anyone who could dare to be like, I sort of agree with fascism. Oh, that person's on the left. The fascists had a really good point. Whenever fascism pops up, fascism only pops up as a response to communism. They're all leftists. And they all should be, but really all that is it's more proof that Republicans and the GOP are like I don't know how much you guys know about the Harlem Globetrotters in this country. It was if you know the whole lore and everything, it was this black basketball team that they just put on a show basically, but they had this one team they played against all the time, the Washington Generals. And the Washington Generals was really just a bunch of white guys who were there to lose to the Harlem Globetrotters. It was like professional wrestling. You had one set, and that is what the GOP has been pretty much since World War II. It has been there to be what Sam Francis called the beautiful losers. We want to try so hard to make life better for you, and when we get in power, we'll cut your taxes a little bit, but we're not going to destroy your enemies. Yeah, we know that these people hate you. We know that they say they want to kill all white people, and that concerns us. But we're really not going to do anything about it, because if we did, we're not going to get invited to the dinner parties. And the dinner parties is where it's at. That's where we go and we schmooze, and that's when you see that basically left Republicans and Democrats go to the same exact parties. And, there might be some personal animosity because of personal issues between a Republican and a Democrat. But for the most part, they're on the same team. They're playing the same game. They have an understanding. Tom Woods, the American libertarian Tom Woods has, said that, what you have in America is you have an evil party and you have a stupid party. And every once in a while, they get together and agree on something stupid and evil.
It's funny in Australia because we have a somewhat similar, somewhat different system where our parties are more or less the same. They're both stupid and evil in a way. They are both running the country into the ground. We aren't a really serious country. Most of our effort and time appears to be engaged in social justice signaling or just keeping the housing market afloat, because that's what most of the economy is based on. So, and both parties agree pretty much entirely on those things with a few very small differences. We actually have Australia's probably worst kept political secret, which is this agreement where they don't talk about immigration. They refuse to talk about immigration, and people are accused of dirtying the public debate when anyone talks about immigration, and they're stepping out of line. And if you're talking about reducing immigration, well, you'll get put on the backbench, or you'll get ejected from the party, or something like that. So we don't even have that, Republican, back of the party, or even with Trump, front of the party discussion and debate on immigration and how much we should have, because the Liberals refuse to touch the 10-foot pole. Worse than that, because we have a different political system than America, we have this system where we have many different parties, all with smaller shares of the pie in Parliament. We have this party called One Nation, which supposedly was white nationalist or whatever when it was first founded and first became involved in politics in the 90s, but has since become what is probably a more moderate version of the Liberal Party as it was in the 90s now.
It sounds like Sinn Féin.
Yeah, yes. It is basic. It is almost as bad as Sinn Féin. They are technically a right-wing party in some ways. They're not a big fan of transgenderism or that sort of thing. But homosexuals, fine. Replacement immigration, fine. Cultural dilution, fine. It's all fine.
Yeah, and they're seeing a surge in the sort of polling numbers at the moment as well, just because the voting public, I think, is not that up to speed on what's going on. And the leader of the party gave a speech in the 90s about Australia being in danger of being swamped by Asians. So there's this public perception that this is an anti-immigration party. But then when you look at who's actually running, and they're putting up South Asian candidates in all these electorates to be as their party representatives. So
South Asians who can hardly speak English, by the way, as well.
Yeah,
Not even and hugging pseudos and saying, "Oh, you don't have to be white to be Australian," and those sorts of things. So the public perception of Pauline Hanson and her party are vastly different from the reality.
Well, I'm an old guy, so I saw Romper Stomper when it first came out,
right?
And I remember going, "Oh, Vietnamese, huh? That seems."
Well, they were a very small minority at the time. It's not like that at all anymore.
Well, I mean, I assume it's Indian.
Well,
because
we have a lot of Chinese. Don't worry about
that. you have what?
We still have a lot of Chinese and Vietnamese and whatnot. Don't worry about
that. The Labor Party brings in Indians, and the Liberal Party brings in Chinese. That seems to be the general gist of what's happening at the moment.
It's absolutely it's insane that we've gotten to the point where people believe that this multiracial society, I mean, that is just a default. When you can look everywhere, and see it just doesn't work. I mean, you could, all right. And then somebody will say Singapore, which is, the exception that proves the rule. But then again, you look at Singapore, what did Lee Kuan Yew do? He said, okay, if I'm going to have all of these groups, these warring Asian factions here, I'm going to have a dictatorship. You spit gum on the ground, you get caned in public.
But also, Singapore's a tiny, tiny city-state. How can you apply that to a huge country the size of America or Australia and expect it to go well?
That's exactly what I say. What I say to people who, people on our side here who are like, well, we just got to take Washington D.C. And I'm like, did you read Sam Francis? Sam Francis talked about the revolution of mass and scale, that it was just too big, that you cannot govern 350,400,000 people at once. I mean, and what would you do? It's like, oh, we're going to have a Caesar. We're going to have a Caesar who's going to take over, become president, and is going to put everything. I'm like, look, now you have like mayors of towns who are like, okay, if you send ICE here, we're going to arrest them. So what are you going to do? You're going to go through the whole country and you're just going to arrest every mayor. Who has the will to do that? And the other question is, and this was the whole deportation issue. It's like, there's this thing, we need mass deportations in this country. And I agree. I mean, I wouldn't argue against that. But, like Darryl Cooper, Martyr Made, he makes the point that, look, even people who voted for Trump, if you come and you start pulling their neighbor, their Mexican neighbor, who they've lived next to for their whole life, out of their house, you're going to have to fight with them. They're going to be like, no, you're not. You can't do that. That's not who we're talking about. We're talking about the people who came here yesterday. Not talking about the person who I live next to, because it's just that's the way Anglos are. Anglos are very open, and that is why the Anglosphere was so ripe to be invaded. Because if you live around your own people for centuries, you tend to start believing, hey, I get along with these people. We bring other people in, they just adopt our ways, and they'll be just like, no, that's not the way this works. That's not the way people work.
Sorry.
Good. No, please.
Oh, it's a good question. It's something I've thought about a few times, actually. If you were a really sincere, liberal-minded person, and you believed really, really strongly in how similar different people are and how you can assimilate people in and you can all get along and sing Kumbaya. But you're a very, very good-hearted person and you believe strongly in data and testing. Hypothetically, let's say you're Denmark or Switzerland or something, wouldn't you just put a complete moratorium on immigration for, say, 50 years or so, watch how it works in other countries, and if it is going really well, singing Kumbaya, then go ahead, let them in. But if it's not, And you've got to, take this very seriously. You've got to send your, scientists and statisticians and whatnot, and media crews to other countries, and then say, all right, so now you see what France is like, you see what Italy and England are like. The public, do you want this? But this never happened. Pretty much no country has done this. There have been slight variances, like previously Denmark has done some studies on this, but they're one of the very few countries in the entire West who have put any studies or care into this and has looked at, deporting people who are just really, really bad, rotten eggs. Even in the UK, when they have someone who's really, really terrible and clearly a cancer on society, they won't deport him. And it's like a multi-million, $10 million thing, and that goes through a media circus for years. It's completely boggles the mind. So I think the conclusion has to be here that these people are essentially ideologues and or stupid, obviously, who just say, well, it's what all trendy people in other countries are doing. So I'm going to invite, millions of Indians into our country because that's the in thing at the moment.
I get the idea that we have you've heard of the term sanctuary cities,
yes,
as far as the United States goes. Yeah. So some friends of mine who are in a Midwest state contacted me, and they wanted to put a PAC together, a political action committee. They concentrated on, it was an anti-immigration PAC. And I'm like, well, that's sort of like, I mean, how much, if we don't start deporting people, what does it matter? So what I told them was, I said, look, if they can have sanctuary cities where it's like, okay, if some migrant gets here, ICE can't come in and do the reverse. Have a political action committee for your state where you put pressure on the local politicians, talk about primarying them, and whatever pressure point is, makes them tick, and say, look, we have to be an anti-sanctuary city. If we find somebody here who is not, who's not a citizen and they're not supposed to be here, we kick them out. We send them somewhere else. El Salvador. I went to El Salvador earlier this year, and I think it's hilarious that I went to a country that just 4 years ago was like the murder capital of the world, and I'm walking around their capital city, and I feel safer in San Salvador walking around at night than I do in American cities walking around at night.
Yeah.
I mean, you can. It's a country of 6 million people, and a lot of them are related. A lot of them are seventh cousins. They're El Salvadorian. They share a culture, so it's a lot easier thing to do. But also, he had the will to do it, and I don't see that happening. Going back to San Francisco and mass and scale, I don't see that happening on a 350 to 400 million person scale. But I see that happening in cities. I see that happening in states. If states could tell, the federal government during COVID, no, we're not going to do, no, screw you. We're not going to do this. They can do the same thing for immigration. But the problem is that we have been, especially in this country, I don't know how it is in Australia. We basically been brainwashed since World War II, since the New Deal happened in this country, that national politics is everything. But I mean, all politics is local. I mean, that's not just a phrase. It's not just a little slogan that we throw out there. I mean, if in the city I live in a city of 2,500 people in the middle of agriculture, in the middle of, an agricultural county. If our sheriff decides, makes a decision that, he's going to crack down on whatever crime there might be, and there's not a lot of crime despite a significant population of people who are prone to crime in this, historically in this country, he basically is the sovereign in this county. And he can wield sovereign power for the most part. People don't even know, a lot of sheriffs don't even know that. A lot of sheriffs do. When Obama was president, he wanted to pass this like wide-ranging gun ban. California, of all places, there were sheriffs in Northern California who basically came out and said, yeah, you can do that all you want. We're not going to enforce any of it. As a matter of fact, there were counties where the sheriff said, I'll deputize everyone in this county, making it legal for them to own any firearm they want.
It's very funny because we do not have that culture in Australia at all.
You haven't had that. I mean, the whole gun thing. So, although I was reading something recently that was saying there's as many guns circulating in Australia more now. So right now than there was even before Port Arthur.
Oh, I don't doubt it at all, actually. Firearms are very common here. Whoever says that we don't have guns here in Australia is just incorrect. There are plenty. I meant more in the sense of the idea of sheriffs having the balls to stand up to the government and say, no, not going to enforce that. We just don't really have that independent-minded culture here. It's much more bureaucratic. Sometimes,
which is crazy because I mean the founding stock is a bunch of criminals.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and when you look here, but I heard, and then you look here, and it's like the Scotch Irish. I mean, Scotch Irish do not want to be told what to do. You go up into West Virginia, and you go into places in like the hills in North Carolina and Tennessee, and they still have that. Get the hell out of here! You're not telling me what to do. You're not going to tell me what to do.
There still is a streak of that here, but it's just very watered down now. Whatever the sort of outward, like stereotypical, impression of an Australian is for people, the reality is probably quite different. Maybe the stereotype would be this rugged, individualistic bush person, but the reality is probably more like a soft suburbanite. Person.
The rough country guy is a tiny minority of the population. Most of us are comfy office job havers at the moment.
Well, someone told me that during COVID that in Australia that the reason they posited that the reason that so many were so willing to not only bow the knee to what the government wanted them to do, but that the police were so enthusiastic about it is because it was a prison culture. Because there's a culture that looks at it and goes, okay, well, there's an authority. And the authority is, I mean, I don't know, what is it? Explain it to me. Is it just that is it been so broken down, so browbeaten?
I'd say actually our experience is more similar to Sweden, in the sense that Sweden used to be just a really, really well-run sort of country. And this was obviously many decades ago, but there was this long history of very good governance, and people were very happy with the way things were going. People were wealthy, people were comfortable. You lived in a very homogeneous society. Obviously, there were the outsiders, a very, very small minority who were very generally well behaved and stuck to their own, which would be the Sami and the Laplanders. But we in Australia have the Aboriginals, which were always this very clear, small, powerless minority, which people generally ignored other than to say, oh yeah, we're Australian and they're them. So it wasn't like, say, in England where you only had essentially the English and some subgroups of the English, and you got the Welsh and everyone knows about them, but they're over there. So in Australia, I'd say that this prison culture, this convict culture thing is very overblown. Sure, founding stock, but the vast, vast majority of people that came into Australia were immigrants who were free people. there was sure, we did have a founding stock, and some people did come in, and it did come in over a fairly long amount of time. But we didn't have a very much time to stew. So, it needs to be remembered that in Australia, we only landed the first settlement here after the American Revolutionary War. So we didn't have hundreds and hundreds of years of setup before that. We are very, very new as a country. So
there's also like an economic component to it. I'm thinking of the Reagan line that the horror story. I'm from the government. I'm here to help. In a country like Australia, where you have these just very vast distances with a very small population that's like thinly spread out, doing things like building railroads, airports, docks, having a national airline service, like the capitalists don't just come in and go like, oh yeah, I can build a train line from here to here and I'll make my investment back. That there's a lot less incentive. Like it's much higher risk for lower reward.
If we were waiting on capitalists to do a train line between Melbourne and Perth or Melbourne and Brisbane, we still wouldn't have one.
Yes. So the government has had this huge role in infrastructure, where the government has like largely stood in instead of like private capital. People have this relationship with the government where they're used to the government doing stuff for them. And we had like a really long period of pretty good governance in this country, which is the reason that we have an airline like Qantas that's like internationally renowned, in a country like Australia with such big distances and such a small population. There's no way that an airline like that could have been built up without government intervention. So if you didn't know, Qantas was a national airline. It was nationalised up until the 90s, I believe, when it was privatised. So that's also part of it. People are just used to the government not being so tyrannical and bad. So that's probably a big part of the difference for Americans.
Well, also, we have we're constantly told and reminded that the heritage Americans, they won their independence through war. So, the first thing that this country did upon becoming a country, to win their independence, was to go to war. And that's something that can't be ignored. I mean,
we got it because we asked nicely. It's slightly more complex than that, but essentially it was the stereotypical Anglo, oh, please.
Yeah, there were way too many Scotch Irish here to ask nicely. But I think that has something to do with it too. Just the fact that this culture. I mean, we had a high culture before 1776, but the going to war to win your independence from and it's also a lot of people just they gloss over that. I mean, you're literally shooting at people that look like you. You're shooting at people that look and sound like you. There's this whole legend of Paul Revere riding, going, "The British are coming." That's not what he said. He said the regulars are coming. They would have the colonists considered themselves to be British. So, I mean, I don't think a lot of people give much credence to the fact that when you win your independence through revolution, and their revolution is against people who are basically your brothers, that also forms a foundation for not asking for things nicely.
Well, with that being said, let's steer a bit back into asking some stuff about the OGC. I find that right-wing groups have a tendency to splinter, and potentially that is from that personality trait that you're describing, the tendency to not ask for things nicely. What are you guys doing, like putting in place to prevent that? Like how do we stop this just shattering into a million pieces like so many other movements have before?
Well, if you're going to have different chapters and they're going to be in different states, some of them are going to be used to different cultures. I think one of the most important things to do is to let them, operate the way they want. And they may operate in a completely different form than another chapter, but allowing people to not having a rigid, structure, a rigid rule set helps a lot. Also, just being a fraternity, being registered and being like this is a fraternity. This is about brotherhood. And when politics starts to enter into it, that's the easily the most divisive thing that can start splitting people apart. Is we're going to do politics this way. Well, no, we're going to do it this way. We want to get this person elected. No, we want to get this person elected. No, you just and like I said, we're 3 years old. We have our issues. We deal with them. We try to deal with them as swiftly as possible, so that it doesn't fester. But up until this point, I think that there's a sense in the old Glory Club that the time is short. And, another thing is not everybody who applies gets in.
Yeah.
I mean, the Alabama chapter, I know for a fact has, and I only mention them because they're the ones I'm closest to because I live in Alabama, even though I'm not an official member of the chapter. I'm their liaison between Central Committee and the chapter itself. But yeah, I mean, I know people personally. I'm talking about people I know personal friends of mine who they said no. So you're not going to, you really have to vet people well. Yeah. And still you're probably going to have someone who's going to sneak through the cracks. I mean, it's obvious. I mean, I'm sure the feds, the federal departments that would be looking into things like this know who you guys are. They know who we are. And I'm sure they're trying to do as much as possible to find out as much as they can or even infiltrate. Another important thing is that we're not calling for revolution. We're just looking to take care of our own people. That's the most important thing is, what was it? Somebody said years and years ago before I even, when I was like, had just started getting into politics and like really starting to understand how politics worked. And I mean, I was still in the baby phase. And I was getting together with other people to talk about it. And one guy pulled me aside and goes, you come to a meeting like this. He goes, the person who's advocating violence, that's the Fed.
Yeah.
So, that's something that I look for and everyone should look for. And, no one's doing that. We have our national conference, and at our national conference this year, I mean, we had some people who were visiting, to see what we were all about. So about people of, means, people who have incredible connections, access to assets, and they were floored that people were just all on the same page, is that we need to come together to organize in our communities to protect each other and to support each other. And yeah, if put it this way, there were people who were there that if they had if there was a hint that we were doing something unseemly, they would have ran for the doors.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you have to vet your people. You just have to vet your people well, and they have to know. I have people who contact me all the time, and they're like, "I knew the goal. You talked about the Old Glory Club a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. I heard you talk about it. I wasn't ready. Now I'm ready. I see the writing on the wall. I know that I'm going to need to get together with people, and that we're going to have to organize for the future, especially as we're watching Donald Trump's, implode.
Yeah.
All these promises he made and everything. And, this week he talks about bringing 600,000 Chinese in, and talks about H-1Bs, and talks about how there are some jobs Americans can't do. Americans can't be, don't even know how to make batteries. It's literally, we've been saying this forever. The white European, they can pretty much learn how to do something in a month. They can become proficient in something in a month. And Trump is up there standing there and going, "Oh, we're going to bring Indians in and Chinese because, Americans just can't do the job." Okay. I mean, he literally sounds like Vivek Ramaswamy, who, I mean, hey,
yeah,
I hope the Democrat win. I mean, he's running for governor of Ohio, a state that I've spent time in and I lived in for a little while and everything. I hope the Democrat wins. Just because I'd rather have a white woman liberal shit lib than some fucking.
It's a great point you were saying before about brotherhood being the center of it, because that's definitely what we think in ANA. Because I've really adopted this in my mindset as much as possible, and that's, you can't really have anything unless you have a brotherhood of people, specifically men, in that are looking out for each other, that are standing up for each other, that don't take everything as a personal slight. That if someone says something about you, you go, "Yeah, no, look, fair enough. I'll take on board what you've said." It's the building block of really anything, and nationalist organizations or pseudo-nationalist semi-political organizations like ours are no exception.
Everything you were talking about before, like the anti-sanctuary city strategy, it's that nothing is possible if you don't have a network of people that are together and are on the same page. And there's no easier way to get on the same page than to just spend time in a room together and be in contact with and talking to and become mates with these people. And I'm finding as we're doing this that a lot of this stuff is so pre-ideological. Like it comes before ideology to just act in your own interest. That if you can just be in a room with someone and be mates with them, you don't need to have this manifesto that you're all working in accordance with. You can just act in what you perceive to be your own interest, and you will all sort of funnel together into moving in the same direction.
Yeah, if your movement, putting it another way, if your movement is comprised of disorganized and brain-rotted Zoomers, or rusted on skinheads, or just kind of like perpetually unemployed people, or whatever, just the hopeless, then you're not going to achieve anything. You need to have an organization of strong men who have got their lives sorted out. Their minds are in good shape. They're not riddled with drug problems or whatever else. And then that's how you build an association that's actually going to last, because you'll find that in associations that fail, inevitably, who's the weak link? It's the adulterers, it's the drug abusers, it's the people who are bad, who are liars, who are thieves. Those people are always the ones that cause all the most of the trouble.
Mm.
Yeah, this country is the United States is a Protestant nation. I'm a Catholic, but I can clearly, it's easy for me to admit that because I know the history of this country. Yeah. And I'd be very happy if the leadership of this country, or however this is going to pan out, was Protestant, and they said, okay, well, only Protestants can hold office. I'd be perfectly fine with that. I mean, it's just that I'm here. Protestants founded it, and but you need a moral grounding. It's like you said, if you're worried about someone going out, getting hammered, cheating on their wife, hurting their children, things like that. I mean, you have to have a moral foundation. And I'm not saying that somebody who doesn't believe in, who isn't a Christian doesn't have a moral foundation. But, if you're moral, I have people argue with me all the time. They're like, well, philosophy can do that for you. I'm like, but how many people are really have gone that deep? And I get that, people will say, well, Christianity and Protestantism in general, even Rome and the Pope are responsible for where we've gotten, because they've been so permissible about it's like, look, everything is sick right now. Orrin McIntyre says this all the time, because you can't blame it on Protestants, you can't blame it on Christians, you can't blame it. Everything is sick. Everything is distorted right now.
Remove the log from your own eye.
Well, I mean, everything, schools, every government, everything is sick now. And, I mean, I understand why there's this, it's not as big as people want to make it out to be, but this whole pagan movement and everything like that. Oh, well, Jews are the problem, and, you're worshiping a Jew and everything. Great. Okay. That's brilliant. But I mean, I need to know that what's your basis? What's your basis for morality? Even like the most hardcore, quote unquote atheists. I don't believe atheism exists. I mean, politics is political. Schmidt taught us that. I mean, politics is, is theological. Schmidt wrote about that. But I need to know where you're getting, and like I said, I believe that atheists can be moral, but how do they get that way? Because basically you live in a Christianized West. I mean, literally Christianity built the West and saved the West. I mean, if it wasn't for the Catholic Church, Europe would be Muslim right now. It would have fallen to Islam centuries ago. So you have to have some basis. You have to have some. It's not only politics. I mean, and a lot of people will say, well, no, it has to be race. It's like, okay, I get that too, but if you're a vanguardist. I mean, I'm not a Democrat. And, as the great Thomas 777 says, look, we're not Jehovah's Witnesses. We're not banging on doors telling you, join us, come with us. Tommy Metzger back in the 80s said, if you did wake up like 100 million normies, what would you do with them?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, most people are just waiting around to be told what to do.
Organization. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking. We just want a vanguard, and there are some people. In the States, I think most of those people are going to be heritage American. Someone like me is going to be adopted in. A half Slav, half Spaniard is going to be able to be adopted in. But that is something that is a lot easier to deal with when you're a vanguard. We had one group that tried to organize around race, and it just turned out that there were even that didn't work. You had people within within that group who didn't agree with what the leader was doing and went behind his back and tried to screw him. Yeah. So it's like, I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be any better if you're organizing behind Christendom, but if you're organizing around Christendom, at least you have an idea of what the morality of the guy standing next to you is. Whether they be Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, you're in the same stadium. You might not be in the same section.
You mentioned before some people that are having some they said that they weren't ready 12 months ago, and now they're having that awakening. Their eyes are opening, and they're seeing a need for organizations like the ones that we're talking about today. And I'm seeing that kind of across the board. Someone else that you brought up earlier was Sargon, and we've seen his sort of transformation from classical liberal to moving much more harder to the right. And yourself, I've been listening to you for a really long time, and I've seen you sort of make the transformation, the saving yourself from the Lolbert brainworms, and probably have helped a lot of other people out of that mental.
Oh God, that's so embarrassing. Oh my God! But you are right. It's like, and the people who followed me out of libertarianism have a tendency to be people with families, people who are grounded. Most of the people who are really attracted to libertarianism are people who have no grounding in anything metaphysical or anything like that. So they use it as not only like a morality, but also as their identity. And that's why they're so, they can seem so maniacal.
Yeah.
Because if you take that away from them, they don't have. You're taking away their whole belief structure and who they are, who they see themselves as. It's really sad, and I never really saw it as my morality or as my identity. I just was like, look, I mean, we can live in a better world if we can just have some cooperation here. But then once you realize there's going to be no cooperation and people don't want to be free, well, you got to start looking into other things. You got to figure other things out. So
yeah, you got to start figuring.
Yeah, freedom implies a lot of. Freedom implies a lot of responsibility that most people don't actually want.
Yes,
it's too hard.
Well, do you have any? We do find we have a couple of sort of ex-libertarians showing up on our doorstep. Do you have any words for like the ones that can be salvaged? How do we help them? Because I just see libertarianism as this like mental trap that's like quite often like high IQ people fall into, and they just spend the rest of their lives just circling the drain. Like how do we save them? Can they be saved?
Well, I mean, it's not our job to save them. It's our job to put a message out there and, see how they respond to it. It's all up to them. I mean, if there's one thing that, 2020 and the COVID thing and, in our country, the George Floyd thing will teach us, you just can't change people's minds. You're not going... You can make the best arguments in the world, and you're still not going to change somebody's minds. It means doesn't mean that you don't try, but you really have to make a decision of who you want to put your energy into. The Austrian painter wrote in his book, in his first book, that he'd be working all day with these people, and he would convince them and make all these arguments, and by the end of the day he had them convinced of his argument, and he felt like I accomplished so much today. And they come in the next day and they completely forgot about everything that he said, and they just went right back to their They're thinking.
That's the normie for you. Yeah, I've experienced this myself many, many times. And then I, like you said, stopped trying to persuade people per se, but more push for our own ideas and our own points. And if and when people want to come by, they are more than welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of libertarians believe, and I actually had deluded myself into believing that like I was a revolutionary, like I was a dangerous thinker. No, I wasn't. I mean, what I believed was no threat to the regime in charge, was no threat to the powers that be. If they did adopt my ideas, they were just they would adopt them and then they would turn them into something else that would be, it's like you have that whole thing, real communism has never been tried, real libertarianism has never been tried. Sure, real libertarianism has never been tried, but they've taken a lot of those ideas, like a free market and everything like that, a quote unquote free market, and used them and then turned them into, didn't use them as purely as the Austrian economist or, the Chicago school guy would want you to use them, but they'd turn them into a monster. I mean, and I don't know that they would ever have that idea in the first place, like free trade or, open borders or, free trade is like one of the worst ideas I can possibly think of. And because free trade is globalist in nature. You're basically saying the market is global. And as soon as you say that, as soon as you say the market is global, that means that all goods are global. And what is the most expensive thing that most businesses have to pay for? It's labor.
Yeah.
And what they're going to do is, well, as soon as labor is commoditized, it becomes a commodity, you're going to look for the cheapest labor. And unfortunately, the cheapest labor in most cases is going to be from a poor country whose culture, who not only the people there are a different culture, they're a different race. And now you're mixing them and you're bringing them into, where you are, just into your, possibly homogenous or built upon a homogenous society. Now you're bringing them in so that you can save, $3 or $4 an hour. And I mean, these are the people who are really the enemy. I mean, I say this all the time. Walmart does not want the borders closed. Those are customers who are flowing over the border. They don't want SNAP payments, which is food stamps, which subsidize food. They don't want all of these entitlements to go away. The guy who the person who has is invested in like like apartment complexes and things like that. They don't want the borders closed. They don't want the government to stop subsidizing certain people's housing. I mean, look at England right now. And this is why I think England could blow over at any moment, or it could turn into 1789 or 1793. There is because people are becoming billionaires in England because they're renting out they're shutting their houses and their hotels to native English. And they're allowing the migrants to come in, taking that money from the government that they're paying them to house them there, and they're becoming billionaires.
And these are
those people are the enemy. Those people are way more of an enemy than that invader, because those people want them there. They're advocating for that invader to be there.
They're making a lot of money from it. They're feeding off of the trough, that's for sure. So, let's think, how do we stop this? And there's lots of different options for it. One of them is just by changing the economics of it, because you're right, we've got this capitalist internationalist system. So all these people in these different countries are really tied together with money, and money flows very easily between nations. So how do we stop this? And basically that's by changing the economics of the equation. So if we can somehow, I'm talking differently from ANA and OGC here, obviously this is more of a political thing. If we can just make the whole thing not profitable, let's tax remittances by a few 100%. Let's say every immigrant that comes in, you have to pay for this, that, and the other for them, instead of becoming something that makes you money. It's something that actually starts to cost you money. All this economics will force these greedy pigs to change tack. And that's one way of doing it, but there's lots of other ways as well. And one of them is by just taking control of the culture and shaming these people for, as you say, these people are the enemy. So if you just change the culture enough and put out enough media to say these guys are the enemy, the public perception is that they're the enemy. You go from people being proud to say, oh, look how many migrants I'm bringing in. You go to people who are ashamed. You can dox people for it, and people do try and dox them for it now, but it doesn't have much effect because the left controls the public perception in the media at the moment. So obviously these things are all very hard to do, but they're really the only way that we can actually change things. You could hypothetically, not endorsing it, you could hypothetically throw Molotov cocktails at these hotels, and that will slow things down temporarily, but that doesn't really slow anything down. They're just going to go to another hotel. They're going to bring in another busload of migrants, probably several more. So that by itself is purely a knee-jerk reaction to a problem and is not a solution. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that, Pete.
Well, I thought of something while you were talking. It was you try to direct the left into, who hates billionaires already, into saying, look, this person's becoming a billionaire by doing this, because obviously they're not going to be against those people being brought into the country. But if you can somehow direct their anger against that billionaire, that could possibly do something.
Yeah, profiting off of human misery. Look at the quality of the food that they're serving in these restaurants. That's disgusting.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? We should put this guy in prison for treating migrants badly. That would be a nice first step.
Attack the left from the left and the right from the right.
Yeah.
Here's one of the biggest problems we have is, and I know OGC is not a political, and ANA is not we're talking about if individuals wanted to get involved in politics, not if organizations wanted to. One of the biggest problems that we have, and it's a huge problem here, you may have heard me talk about it, is that the left will get their radicals elected to office and get them $500,000 a year sinecures in think tanks or whatever. The right cancels theirs.
Yeah.
The right will not deal with their radicals. The right will not give, money will flow into heritage. The money will flow into even Cato and Reason magazine. Cato, a libertarian organization who, whenever arguments are made for why open borders is good for the economy, they're always quoting a Cato paper. But there's no one is pouring money into people who have far right ideas. People who are reading Schmidt, people who are reading on Power by De Juvenal, people who are looking at how politics really works and knows exactly what needs to be done. We just don't have we don't have the patronage that the left does.
It's that trough at it again. We're just not profitable. Where's the money in us? Let's say we do this deportation program that so many of us want. Is there any money in a deportation program? No, it's the promise of a generally more prosperous and coherent society later on. But that's not something that I foresee actually making much money. Well, what else do we want? Well, we want a less consumerist society, one where people are less into drugs and less reliant on medications and things like that. Oh well, there's no money in that either. All right, so I guess one way of thinking about a problem is how can we come up with an idea that will actually make rich people money, that will make them interested in sponsoring us? Because obviously the most attractive and powerful thing that people want with money is they want access to power, and that's something that we can actually grant them, but only if we are obviously popular enough and already close-ish to the levers of power. Then we can get some elites bleeding away. But up until that point, I don't really see much of an appeal for many wealthy people to just pour money into us. So any thoughts?
Well, wealthy people, they can afford to live someplace safe. They're not struggling to feed their family. If they don't want to send their child to college because I'm talking about people on the quote unquote right. If they don't want to send their kid to college, well, I mean, their kid may not have to work anyway.
Yeah,
or they could go into the family business, or you can just give them some kind of sinecure job or something like that.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, is the right wing is conservative and the left wing is revolutionary, and revolutions don't stop.
Yeah.
So they constantly have to be feeding that. The money has to be poured into it to keep that revolution going. And when you start talking about right wing revolutionaries, Stormy Waters says the enemy of any right wing revolutionary movement is the conservative. The enemy, he says, write it on the board 1,000 times. The enemy of any right wing revolutionary movement is the conservative. And so we have no patronage. There are people I know people. I know at least one person who goes out of his way to, dish money around. He's somebody who, built up a very successful business, paid it off, and he will give right wingers money if he thinks that they're moving things and not. He doesn't have to see a return. Yeah. He doesn't have to see a monetary return. He just wants to see the culture and things moving in the direction he wants it to move. So, I also think that there are people who think that, well, if on paper people see that I'm giving money to this organization over here, I'm going to be an outcast. I'll put there'll be a bullseye on my back. I think when it comes down to it, I think most people are cowards. And most people are just way too comfortable with what they have. And, when everything is taken away from you and you have nothing left to lose, that's the most dangerous man out there.
So you're thinking that while we might have some success with elite peel-off, that due to our general ideas and what we want, we're unlikely to get much peel-off until things start getting just a bit more darker and darker. Like I'm looking at Elon Musk, and obviously I know he's a controversial figure and lots of things up and down about him, but one of the reasons he ended up going off the plantation a bit was because his one of his kids went trans, and that sort of made him very anti-woke. And that is something that might help a little bit, because it is quite personal, and even though that's not a money-making venture, that is something that does affect people strongly and makes them, I guess, vengeful in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You need you need people to get angry. You need people to.
It's not just.
You need people.
It's not.
You need people to take it personally.
Yeah.
When I see right wing, whether it be Republicans or Democrats, talking shit about my people, I take it personally.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not doing this for the money. I'm doing this because I've read history, I've looked at history, and in order for change to take place, some people are just going to have to say, fuck it. If they kill me, they kill me. if they come against me, they come against me.
I'm
And
reminded of,
I just,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead. I mean, I just, when you read about great men of history, and I'm not saying I'm going to be a great man of history, I'm going to be forgotten, but at least I can go to the grave knowing that I did something to push forward to destroy this. I mean, come on. This enemy since World War II is, and the enemies, the enemy since World War II are also the enemies that gave us World War I and World War II, and the Spanish Civil War. Three of the worst things that ever happened in the history of this planet. These fucking people need to pay, man. I mean,
yes.
They need to pay. And I'm not talking about armed revolution. I'm talking about building out something that they can't touch.
Yeah.
Which is going to drive them crazy. And in the meantime, what you're building out is also weakening them because you don't need them anymore.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking of that I guess ethno-nationalists can think about is another way is elite peel-off can happen when there's fear of something, and this could be of woke or whatever, but I don't think that's a very strong fear at present. Maybe the George Floyd riots, if they continued, could have been that impetus. But the fear of communism is very strong and was very strong in many different countries, and that's how these, I guess, smaller organizations that didn't have much power initially managed to get some. But there's also this sense of impending doom. These laws change, which start impacting people. In South Africa, for example, it's obviously a pretty poorly run country, but the ANC did a pretty good job of keeping wealthy South Africans in pretty comfortable positions for a while. The ones that weren't basically left the country, but there was a bit of a relatively smooth transfer of power from what I understand. Same thing happened in Rhodesia. People talk about like all these massacres and things that happened in Zimbabwe, and that may have been the case, but a lot of wealthy white people in Zimbabwe were allowed to stay there for a long time. So you can't peel off everyone. There's all this politics back and forth, but fear is probably fear and vengeance are probably our strongest recruitment tools when it comes to the elites that we do kind of need to come over to our side in order to win.
I was going to make the point before. It's not just the elites. Like the common people also are like in many avenues in opposition to us, and we need their, not necessarily them to join us, but we need their acquiescence. Like we need them to say, you're like, oh, all right, well, you're going to do that, and I've figured out that that's going to be good for me, and I just can't see that happening until things get considerably worse than they are now. Like we're seeing the rumbles of it. We're seeing the energy building in a lot of different ways, but I just think we're not there yet. And
I'm reminded of groups like the Blade Runners in the UK who go around taking down those cameras. Now those cameras are really unpopular, right? So if people see them taking down those cameras, they don't really say anything. So we don't need people on side. That vanguard movement very much in favor of that idea, not a mass movement. But if we can just get people to go, yeah, all right, I'm not going to say anything, or I'm not going to counteract them, then that is a big step forward from where we are at the moment.
Well, that's kind of the reason why street activism and protesting is not going to be as successful for us at least at this point in time, is because when the leftists, the Antifa types, go out and they do they're cracking skulls and breaking windows, there is a crowd of normal people that will let them melt in and disappear. And if our vanguard spear tip wants to go out and do the smashing windows, cracking skulls, there's no crowd for them to disappear into, to melt back into. quite the opposite. As Stormy Water says, the conservative is the enemy of the revolutionary, the right-wing revolutionary. All right, we've been the common. Yeah, sorry, Pete, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well said. And it's getting kind of late here.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, that last part of the conversation, the common thread running through it was culture. That was one of the big things that we were talking about. How do we move the culture to the point where we can drag across elites, where we can get the common people to acquiesce to these ideas? And something that probably a lot of people don't know is the huge role that poetry plays in Australian culture. At one time, it was a ubiquitous feature of all Australian newspapers, and lots of prominent Australians and our politicians and such would try their hands at writing poetry, get it published in the newspapers. So usually we start off our episodes with a poem reading, but today we're going to finish with one. So we're going to be reading No Foe Shall Gather Our Harvest by Mary Gilmore. Sons of the mountains of Scotland, clansmen from Corray and Kyle, bred of the moors of England, children of Erin's green isle, we stand foursquare to the tempest, whatever the battering hail. No foe shall gather our harvest, or sit in our stockyard rail. Our women shall walk in honour, our children shall know no chain. This land that is ours forever, the invader shall strike in vain. Anzac, Wapami, and the Mame, could ever the old blood fail, no foe shall ever gather our harvest or sit on our stockyard rail. So hail fellow met we muster, all hail fellow met we fall in. Wherever the guns may thunder, or rocket airmail spin, bomb of the soil and the whirlwind, though death itself be the gale, no foe shall gather our harvest or sit on our stockyard rail. We are the sons of Australia, of the men who fashioned the land. We are the sons of the women who walked with them hand in hand, and we swear by the dead who bore us, by the heroes who blazed the trail, no foe shall gather our harvest or sit on our stockyard rail. That was a poem by Mary Gilmore. All right, thank you very much to Pete for coming on and joining us today.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Anyone that's been living under a rock and hasn't listened to any of Pete's stuff, go and listen to it. He's got so much good stuff. I'm catching up on his 200 Years Together series with Dr. Raphael Johnson. It's really good. I highly recommend it.
And don't worry, we'll spell his last name. It'll be on the YouTube details.
And let us know in the comments any topics you want to hear about from us, or if there's anything you would like us to do a show on. As always, I'd encourage our supporters in the audience to make sure you like and subscribe and share our content far and wide. And lastly, if you want to reach out, you can find us at osnatives.org. Thank you very much.